Okay, welcome everyone to our discussion today, which is going to be the marriage of a presentation that I shared at ILS last year, the Leadership Sangha, which I decided ultimately not to share it formally there, but still in Mayapur at that time, titled Kings of Democracy, and bringing that together with a presentation of a document called the Bhakta's Bill of Rights. And this is something I'm nervous about sharing because when things matter to you, you get nervous about them. I feel like I'm going on a first date with the girl who I know I'm going to marry because this Bhakta's Bill of Rights is the synthesis of my 10 years of attempting to help develop spiritual community within our Gaudiya Vaishnava Sangha, and particularly in Ypsilanti, Michigan, with a project called the Harmony Collective that some of you might be familiar with or aware of. And it has not been an easy road, but it's been a very rewarding road. And along my journey of it, I've come to ask myself why more people haven't taken the steps to create this kind of community, why I'm unique amongst some of my peers in having tried to start something like this, and how to create an atmosphere where more places and more people feel comfortable taking that responsibility of real community development. I've had a lot of informal conversations about that over the years. And so this Bhakta's Bill of Rights is a kind of synthesis of the essence of what needs to be present and needs to be felt and understood by everybody involved in a community before it can really grow beyond just a kind of sentimental sangha that's there for a little while, but may also eventually go away after some time for lots of different reasons. So what is that social structure that really anchors the community in a way that it can resist the tides of change that are going to come and grow also into something substantial that fructifies, that really gives something sweet to those that come and connect with it. So I'll invite you all to begin our Sangha today with a simple invocation that I like to use when we're having community-based discussions. Last night at the Harmony Collective, we have something called the Cabinet and Council, the CC. And at the beginning of the CC, we always read from the CC, the Chaitanya Charitamrita, and we use this simple invocation. Externally, it's the Cabinet and Council, but internally, our sense of purpose is that we're trying to create the communal experience and atmosphere that is narrated there in the Chaitanya Charitamrita. This is our real hope and effort as Gaudiya Vaishnava community and Sanghas. We want to manifest that social atmosphere that Mahaprabhu and his associates did and enjoyed for our own sake and for the sake of the world that's so desperate for it. So we'll begin with that simple invocation that is traditional to use before studying that text, and then we'll get into our presentation. And then I'll have a few spots where I welcome comments or reflections, any questions from you all. I don't like just talking at. I'm very happy to have a little audience with us today as well so that we can have some dialogue. Jai Jai Shri Chaitanya, Jaya Nityananda, Jaya Dvaita Chandra, Jaya Gaura Bhakta Vrinda, Jaya Jai Shri Chaitanya, Jaya Nityananda, Jaya Dvaita Chandra, Jaya Gaura Bhakta Vrinda, Jaya Jai Shri Chaitanya, Jaya Nityananda, Jaya Dvaita Chandra, Jaya Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. And with that, I'll share my screen and we'll enter into our formal presentation. Everyone's okay for seeing that? Okay, thank you for the nods of affirmation. A call for kings of democracy and the need for a Bhakta's Bill of Rights. Is that going to work? Switch slides. So here's one of my favorite pictures of our community building efforts over the last 10 years, a beautiful kirtan happening in the side yard of our temple at the Harmony Collective. And I share this to share that what I'm sharing is not something that has come from a kind of armchair perspective. I've been in the trenches the last decade, wanting and in some ways being able to support the development of real spiritual community. And I've been helped in unimaginable ways by so many of the people in this picture and so many other people who are not in this picture. And so I offer my obeisances to them as well as everybody else. who's here today to share and churn this topic. It's not that I'm the one who came up with this, or that the success of our community, what we've been able to claim, is solely on me, but also I identify myself as somebody who has taken that responsibility over the last decade. And so the things that I share today are really first and foremost for those people who are wanting, or who have and are taking that same responsibility in this Kali Yuga atmosphere, in the present dysfunction of the Gaudiya community, is not an easy task. It is such a it's such a difficult thing. And so to you first, I offer these insights, hoping that they will save you headache and heartache that I and people in this picture have had to go through because of our own ignorance, our own missteps, our own misalignments, our own unawareness that we've come to, mostly through hard work and trial and error. There are worshipful lordships, Sri Sri Gornitai, who came to us 2 Gaur Purnims ago. This will be their 2-year anniversary of arriving here. They were installed in Encinitas over 2 decades ago. My parents, my in-laws, they ran a small temple out there in California many years ago, and Gornitai went with them when they moved, and now they've come to us, and we've been privileged to worship them for the last 2 years. So we make this offering to them as well. So we're going to be discussing Varnashram things today. And Varnashram is a touchy topic, and some people get very obsessive over it and get very fastidious about it and try and dial down on the rules. And I like to keep this image close at hand when discussing Varnashram and making presentations about it. Those of you that aren't familiar, this is from a famous film called Castaway. Here is Tom Hanks here playing the part of Hiranyakashipu after his austerities. That classic 7th canto picture. He's got the beard and the scruffy hair. He's all skinny and scrawny. He's been stuck on a desert island for a long, long time. And he finally decided, I'm going to make it off this island. I'm going to make an attempt. He had a plane crash, and he's alone, and he'll die on the desert island if he doesn't try to make it for land. So the ideal thing to do to make it to land would be to have a nice boat. But you don't have a nice boat when you're on a desert island with a plane crash. You just have the idea of a boat in your head. And that idea of a boat in his head was enough for the character Tom Hanks is portraying to fashion something that acts well enough like a boat that he gets off the island. Instead of having a nice cabin to go to bed at night and keep himself shaded from the sun, he just can hobble together this like plane wing folded in half. Instead of a nice rudder connected to a nice romantic captain's wheel to stand on, he just has this flimsy little stick attached to, some little broken off piece of plane wing stuck in the water to act as something that can guide the boat, sort of. Instead of a nice big hull that can withstand the waves of the ocean and keep him afloat assuredly, he can just tie together some sticks and hope that those sticks float. And in fact, they do. It's good enough. And this, in my opinion, is the level to which our acharyas are inviting us to engage with Varnashram, not to try to build a yacht and then sail to the other side, but to be honest, what is the crude raft? What's the least but the most that we need to be able to carry this human existence towards the shore of our eternal aspiration, our hope in Goloka Vrindavan? And that is where we come to our discussion of Varnashram. The principle of a boat, the principles of Varnashram are good enough in this age of Kali to get us across. We don't need the fancy details. And those who discuss Varnashram on the level of fancy details are a big part of the social problem within our devotee community, because Varnashram is available now. The principles of Varnashram are available now, but we're not offering them to our people because we're still stuck in these romantic, antiquated stereotypes from days gone by. So when we talk about the discussion of politics and administration and management, we don't have to wait for kshatriyas of old. The experience that they provided is available to us today if we're willing to work with what we actually have. So from Srila Prabhupada, The point is that in any society, there must be a leader, there must be directors, and there must be workers. But everyone should be so satisfied, they forget the difference. This is Prabhupada discussing Karl Marx, and here he is standing in the famous Red Square of Russia, communist Russia at the time. So Prabhupada has the back and forth about different philosophers of the West that's compiled into one of the BBT books. And here in discussing Marx, he brings this out, that it's not the leaders are up on high and imposing their presence upon everybody, but it's not that there's no leaders either. The leaders should be capable enough and deft enough that their presence is encouraging and felt, but it doesn't discourage others from feeling important, from feeling valued, from feeling connected in a meaningful way to the Sangha. Leader means authority. His instruction is followed, and it actually happens. That is leader. Without leader, you cannot become a community or nation. So this was one of the first developments within our Harmony Collective Sangha, is that some of us, including myself, had to accept leadership roles in the name of egalitarianism, and we're all devotees and it's all one and everyone can do everything. If we had tried to remain on that kind of shallow, surface, superficial, romanticized level, we wouldn't be where we are today. And we have a temple, we have a farm, we have a restaurant, we just started a school for children. All of those have their own dedicated building. So there's a lot moving and there's a lot happening. And if people weren't willing to step up and play the visible role of a leader, then none of that would be able to manifest, or if it did, it would quickly fizzle. So the presence of leaders is essential, and the kind of modern idea of homogenized organization and consensus across all decision-making is very cumbersome and very dangerous, and we're not going to discuss it too much, but just to say that if you're trying to avoid the presence of leaders, that's its own kind of ignorance. That's its own kind of naivety. Although it may be tempting to do so because of the abuse of the different leaders. Don't fall into that trap. We need leaders. They're important. They're a part of Krishna's plan. So a few years ago, this presentation, or the first half of this presentation, Kings of Democracy, it was inspired by Ram Navami and the coincidence of listening to a particular piece on NPR. NPR was a national public radio. It's a typically liberal news outlet in the US, kind of posing itself as objective and not commercialized, although that's not true. And so I like to listen to it sometimes. And there was a woman on there who was part of an NGO, a charity, which goes around to different countries in the world and assesses their democratic expression. And she does this, and their organization does this with the assumption that democracy is the best thing for everybody everywhere. And I, as a political scientist, disagree with that. I was trained as a political scientist at a university here in the US. And so even before I met the devotees, I was already skeptical about democracy for everybody. And then when I got a hold of Prabhupada's quotes like demon crazy and such, I found my acharya in all ways. So I was listening to this piece expecting to be able to pick it apart pretty easily, even without going into any kind of spiritual understanding. Instead, though, I was glad to be left with a more appreciative understanding of what democracy means on a philosophical level and what organizations like hers are trying to do. Because rather than discussing the kind of intricacies of democracy from the citizens' participation side, voting, etc., what really was being described by this person and the way their NGO measures the quality of a country's democracy and democratic expression is the degree to which the government respects its individual citizens. To what degree does a government recognize the sovereignty of its individual citizens? That's what makes it a good or bad democracy. Citizen participation, equality before the law, political tolerance of different opinions, accountability for leadership, transparency for leadership, control of the abuse of power within leadership. So a lot of focus on governance. How does the political structure relate to itself, and how does that translate to the experience of the individuals, the citizens themselves? And when I sat with it for a moment, what I started to appreciate was that the experience of a citizen in a healthy Vedic monarchy is very much the same ideal, the same attempt that's being made by modern democracy in its philosophical, ideological expression. Of course, in its practical expression, it has its failures, and we're not denying that, nor will we spend much time talking about it. But from the place of ideal, what do people want as their felt experience? The irony is that there's a lot more in common with Vedic monarchy and modern democracy than there is at odds. They have more in common than they have at odds. And therefore, this idea to be kings of democracy, that if you're really living out the Vedic ideal and providing a healthy Varnashram environment, then your citizens will have the same experience that somebody in a healthy modern democracy is having. And so we started to go through the Shastra, and in the longer presentation, we provide 6 different examples of democratic expression by kings within our community. For today's sake, though, just to emphasize the point, we'll touch on 2. So this is from Srila Prabhupada's Krishna book. Thus, Arjuna indicated that Kshatriyas should not sit back comfortably on the pretext of performing Vedic rituals, but must rather be very chivalrous in protecting the citizens. Brahmanas, being engaged in spiritual activities, are not expected to do anything which requires physical endeavor. Therefore, they need to be protected by the Kshatriyas so that they will not be disturbed in the execution of their higher occupational duties. This is in regards to the pastime of Arjuna coming to the steps of Maharaj Ugrasena's palace and finding there a Brahmana totally enraged and hurling Vedic curse words over the gates of Maharaj Ugrasena's wall. This Brahmana was enraged because his sons had died prematurely. And although sadly we're all too familiar with that kind of thing happening to good people today, in that age, if such a thing was happening to a Brahmana who was in good standing and doing his duty, then it was within his right to find fault with the leaders, to find fault with the king. Something is inauspicious in this atmosphere, and it's not because of me. I'm doing my part, so somebody else is not doing their part. And the claim by this Brahmana was that it was Maharaj Ugrasen and the Kshatriyas in general who were meant to be protecting them. So what did Arjuna do when he found this criticism coming to the leadership? What did he do when he found this Brahmana enraged and cursing and slurring on the front porch of his grandfather, essentially? Instead of gaslighting him, instead of trying to explain the situation away, instead of telling him, go fill out a form, send an email to this secretary and we'll get back to you in a month, we'll form a committee about it. Instead of any of those different deflections that we might be familiar with, Arjuna said, yes, you have lost faith in the Kshatriyas. He didn't investigate the situation. He took on good faith the Brahmana's own word that I'm in good standing. He simply said, yes, I see you have lost faith in the Kshatriyas, and if I can't restore that faith, I'll kill myself. That's the kind of absolute accountability that is essential for leadership. That is just like a parent provides for the child absolute accountability. From the get-go, the child's welfare is absolutely the parent's responsibility. Then the child can grow into their own sense of responsibility. But if the parent is constantly gaslighting the 3-year-old, telling them what they should and shouldn't be doing and how their decision-making is causing their own discomfort, the 3-year-old, the 4-year-old, the 8-year-old, the 10-year-old that receives that kind of treatment can never actually mature into a full adult because they've been given too much responsibility too soon. So this willingness of the leadership to take full responsibility for the welfare of the citizenry, Arjuna is showing that, and it's a democratic ideal also. The idea that ultimately the leadership is responsible for the welfare of the citizens, and the citizens have a right to call out the leaders when things are failing, when the system is not working, when the atmosphere is inauspicious and it's creating discomfort for others. So Arjuna, rather than feeling called out and insecure and resentful of this Brahmana calling to attention the failure of the Kshatriyas, Arjuna immediately took that full responsibility and was willing to pay the ultimate cost. And of course, the pastime carries forward, and it turns out Vishnu is behind the whole thing, wanting to have darshan of Krishna and Arjuna. But from the social political side, don't lose sight of Arjuna's example as a leader. And then one more, we couldn't talk about great kings of Vedic society without talking about Sri Ram. Again, my original presentation has 6 such examples, and there are many more also. Maharaj Shibi, another one. But here we're talking about Sri Ram and the dog. On hearing Sri Ram's speech, the wise Lakshman, after hurriedly calling the dog, informed Sri Ram about the dog's arrival, and presented him before Sri Ram. Having seen the dog that had come, Sri Ram said to him, "O dog, tell me what you have to say. You need not fear at all." This is from Valmiki's Ramayan, the Uttarakhand, just in case somebody would try to dismiss this anecdote as from the Tulsi Ramayan, which has a less official standing in our community. This is from Valmiki's Ramayan, and Sri Ram is welcoming into his palace not just any old citizen, not just a peasant from the street, but a literal dog from the street who has a grievance. And the dog himself is apprehensive to enter Ram's court. He tells Lakshman, make sure Ram knows I'm a dog. Before you, I know he'll just say, let anybody come before him, because that's how he is. That's the atmosphere of welcoming that he gives his citizens. But make sure Ram knows it's a dog that wants to come. So Lakshman has to go back and forth twice. First to check, is anybody else there? Then second he says, yes, there's somebody there. But then second, he has to go back to make sure Ram knows it's a dog that's there. Ram says, yes, of course he may come. So the dog comes before Ram and tells him about mistreatment that he's experienced at the hands of a Brahmana. This Brahmana has lashed out at the dog with a cane and hurt him. And the Brahmana says, well, what does he expect? He's a dog in the street. And the Brahmanas are going back and forth, the advisors of Ram, how to deal with this, because it's just a dog in the street, but he did hurt a citizen, but it is a Brahmana actually. So how do you punish a Brahmana, especially for just hurting a dog in the street? One, it's radical that Ram is even hearing the objections of a dog in the street. The discomfort of a dog in the street is a concern for Ram. What to speak of his human citizens? What to speak of the devotees in our society? How sensitive we should be if real discomfort is being experienced by them, especially when it's direct abuse. Real mistreatment has happened. How much deference they should receive. Not only is Ram offering this dog his day in court, but also in the end, Ram lets the dog decide what to do with the Brahmana. Ram lets the dog actually participate in the political process, in the adjudication of the case, by doling out the punishment to the Brahmana. And ironically, what does he do? He makes him a temple president. Going back to the difficult nature of the service of leading sanghas, the dog says, this man is not yet aware of what it means to be responsible for others, even in a basic way. Let him be the most responsible person within the most high stakes environment. Let him become temple president of one of the mutts of Ayodhya. And there he will really learn the lessons of what it means and the cost of mistreating others. So Ram takes that advice from the dog. Even amidst his Brahminical council, he accepts that this dog has a right and also has it right in terms of assessing the situation. So that kind of citizen participation, we don't normally think of in a Vedic monarchy with our romanticized Hollywood versions of the king upon high, just passing edicts with his right-hand sage, long beard, and majestic cloak hanging off his shoulders. And between the two of them, they've got the whole world figured out. This kind of citizen participation is not something we usually associate with Vedic monarchy. And that yet there it is happening in Ram Raj, in the kingdom of Lord Ram. He's not only just inviting normal citizenship participation, but even from a dog. And another example we take from Ram in the longer presentation is Ram's going out into the citizenry and hearing from the Shudra, just speaking offhandedly to his wife, how he's losing trust in Ram. And that concern of even the Shudra's offhanded over-the-shoulder comment is enough for Ram to send Sita away, to protect the integrity of the community. Such is the deference to even the smallest, most insignificant inklings of loss of trust for a true leader, how they are careful to try to restore that, how they are careful to try to protect that for the citizenry. Ram is ready to listen to the rumors of a Sudra and the pleas of a street dog in order to keep his kingdom in order. So then we come to Srila Prabhupada and his direction of management. And I'd like to stop here just for a moment before we get into that. And invite if there's any comments or questions about that first half, we'll say, of our presentation, this idea of the kings of democracy being our Vedic kings, and the true atmosphere that we're trying to create in our social communities via following the Varnashram ethic is actually something much closer to the modern day democratic experience than first glance might indicate. I'd like to see if anybody has any reflections or comments on that before we transition into discussing the Bhakta's Bill of Rights. Everyone must be in full agreement, which is reassuring. Either that or they don't want to get in trouble like me for speaking about these things in public. Either way, that's okay. Okay, then we'll move on. And we'll begin discussing the Bhakta's Bill of Rights. Bill of Rights harkens to an idea. Actually, I'll stop my sharing right now. The Bill of Rights is a very explicit attempt to hearken to a dynamic in or a structure within the American political system, the American Bill of Rights, which were amendments to the Constitution. And the Constitution is the document that establishes the rules of the game in America. The reason that politics is important, the reason that these discussions are valuable even for Gaudiya Vaishnavas who are more concerned with PREMA, is because politics establish the day-to-day interactions and how they will be carried out. We don't have PREMA yet. And the first step towards getting there is admitting that. We're not able to act on that platform. And to act, to fake that, is unhealthy. Rather, as Krishna advises Uddhava in the 11th canto, better to adhere to Varnashram to the degree that you don't have prema. Follow these basic rules of good human conduct to the degree that spontaneous love is not moving your every interaction, seeing everyone as part and parcel of me, as God. In that way, with the Constitution of the United States, there had been many things established to protect the citizens in general. But before the Bill of Rights, those protections were only by default offered to white male landowners. Although everybody was entitled to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, functionally, the only people that were getting it were white male landowners. Before the Bill of Rights and then subsequent amendments, the first 10 were the original Bill of Rights, and there's been 20 plus added, there are now over 20 with about a dozen added since the original 10, where it was established women also can vote and Black people also get full protection under the law and right to fair trial for anyone. Those kind of natural protections, which are now taken for granted, were actually established by the Constitution also, but not actually applied until the Bill of Rights came out. And so in the same way in our devotee communities, the Bhakta's Bill of Rights, which I'll share in a moment, and some of you may have seen already, in many ways says things that feel and seem obvious. And we kind of assume that we may be doing these things already. But because they haven't been established clearly and they haven't been laid out for especially the common devotional citizen in your average Sangha, the effect is not there yet. It's still a privileged few that are getting the privileged experience of protection, and even protection they don't deserve and beyond what they ought to be having. And then the rest of us are in this kind of scrum of sentimentality and backroom politics. Instead of front room politics, out in the open, clear and objective, we're all subjected to backroom politics. Who do you know? Whose guru is your guru? Whose disciple? And how long? And how much money did they donate last time? And whose kid is playing what part in the play? It all plays into this weird equation of how the community operates. And when a healthy person from the outside witnesses all of that fuzziness, they naturally feel apprehensive to engage meaningfully with the Sangha. Why do I want to bring that kind of complication and confusion on myself? Why do I want to compromise my own integrity potentially by getting involved and entangled in this kind of nepotism culture? Better I just stay back here, chant Hare Krishna, mind my own business. Because if I get into that business, I may get dirty and I may get implicated in things that are going to be a big distraction for my ultimate goal. It's sad that that's become the norm in terms of a view of a healthy person's engagement with the society, and especially the formal institutions of our movement. But I would challenge anybody that would dare to say that's not the case. It's everywhere I look, that it's only a select few people, privileged few, who are on the in crowd somehow or other. They might be thoughtful and intelligent, but they're on the in crowd, and so they're engaging, and the rest of the thoughtful, intelligent folks are keeping a distance. They may engage ceremonially with the Sangha, okay, Janmashtami, Sunday feast, take prasad, lead a kirtan, but are they investing their real sense of self and service in those containers that Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur and Bhaktisiddhanta and Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada expected them to? I'd say no. So how to create that atmosphere where people again feel comfortable? It's not by having ratification from on high, from the managerial and ecclesiastic bodies. That hasn't worked, and it doesn't work. If you go through their declarations, you can see everything the Bhakta's Bill of Rights is indicating. You can see it there already somewhere, just as it was already in the US Constitution. But until it became explicit and the average citizen became conversant, that's the most important element. The average citizen became conversant, nothing changed. And so the hope of this Bhakta's Bill of Rights is that the average Bhakta recognizes exactly how they should be dealt with and how they themselves should deal with the political dynamics of their Sangha. Just as an American citizen understands, I have right to free speech, which means freedom of religion, which means I can chant Hare Krishna on the street with my mridanga, and you can't tell me I can't. Our movement has literally survived off that kind of political awareness in Western democracies. And the same must go, the same will go inside our own sanghas. When you know that the temple president cannot just take your service away because they don't like the way that you looked at their child, then we will again have real sangha restored. And until then, it's just this kind of sentimental wish-wash. So with that, where do we get off saying all these things about how politics should be established within our Sangha? Of course, our own Srila Prabhupada. He wrote the direction of management, which was never implemented. One of the real hurdles in front of the pure devotee is their own purity, their own charisma. Because of Srila Prabhupada's own charisma, he didn't establish his own vision for political culture in ISKCON. Because at the end of the day, if you can ask a political system or you can ask the pure devotee, who are you going to ask and whose word are you going to take? So Prabhupada had a vision for how his society should be run managerially, but it wasn't implemented in full because he was still there. But in his absence, all the more so, we must recognize how essential it is that these objective structures for administration and decision-making be put in place and maintained and honored, not just from on high, but especially down low, every day in the local yatras and temples where the actual experience of Krishna consciousness happens for people. So these are just some selected excerpts Prabhupada said from the direction of management, which anybody can Google and read the entire document of. His Divine Grace will select the initial 12 members of the GBC. In the succeeding years, the GBC will be elected. Votes? Democracy within the Society of Krishna Consciousness? This demon crazy behavior? Elected by a vote of all temple presidents, who will vote from a ballot of all temple presidents, which may also include any secretary who is in charge of a temple. So if you're a leader on the local level, you have the opportunity to become a leader on the international level, so to speak. You've demonstrated that sense of responsibility, and your peers will assess you. So some principles can be drawn there. Another point, the commissioners will serve for a period of 3 years, term limits, and they may be reelected at the end of this period, not indefinite, for life. Prabhupada had this one quote over the shoulder, GBC for life, And every other direction and narrative and instruction about how to structure the management has been put aside in relationship to this one offhanded saying, GBC for life. But in truth, we see when Prabhupada sat and thought about it and wrote out a structure, he understood the value of term limits for leadership positions, and I would say in general, not just the GBC, but temple presidents, secretaries of all kinds. It's natural that there's a calcification, there's a laziness, there's a privilege that comes with leadership that lasts too long, and to be very wary of that effect, even on the best, most well-meaning people, to be very wary of and to check that effect. Term limits are natural and spoken to here by Srila Prabhupada. And then finally, removal of a temple president by the GBC requires support by the local temple members, which indicates for us that the local congregation should have some say who their temple president is or isn't. It's not just from on high that the GBC picks his buddy's best friend to do the service, or his Sankirtan friend from the van from years ago, or god brother, god sister, or disciple. But the congregation has a choice. They have a say in who day to day is taking care of them. And so with Prabhupada's own indication, we offer the Bhakta's Bill of Rights. The invitation is that we upgrade our approach from personal grievance to principled request in terms of the social dynamics of our Krishna conscious community. Thank you. Thankfully, the last 15 years, although it's been messy and it's been ugly and it's been difficult, the internet, the information age has helped for the sober devotees of our Gaudiya community to come to terms with and understand in full the various abuses and misapplications of principle that have gone on in our community, and what has been the cost of that, and how to start helping and supporting those who have been real victims of that, even in spite of the institutions who may or may not be willing to provide that support. The devotee Sangha is stepping up and resourcing each other. And I would offer that it's time now to shift that narrative that's been going on for 10 to 15 years, which has been a healthy, important narrative as a kind of catharsis and a kind of therapeutic purging of resentment and anger and sadness and grief and feelings of betrayal. This narrative of grievance, what has gone wrong and who has done wrong and how that is bad and how that is intolerable and how that has hurt and upset people. Shift that narrative of grievance now to a narrative of principled reform. We have to stop talking about individuals who did things wrong and start talking about the systems that allowed wrong things to go on. Because anybody who's been a part of leadership and management understands that, in general, the worst part about devotee leaders is that they're all good devotees. The worst part about devotee leaders is that they're trying their best, and their best just wasn't good enough, or they were in a very difficult situation that didn't give them the support they needed, and so then they couldn't support others as they needed. And so if we continue with this personal grievance narrative, pointing fingers at people, we run the risk of ourselves being the abusers. As Parikshit hears from Yudhisthira in the form of Dharmaraj the bull in the 17th chapter of the first canto, the accuser becomes the abuser. If a sober mentality isn't present in the person who's levying accusation, you may be running the risk of perpetuating the same kind of violence that your so-called abuser did towards you. In so many cases, our bad leaders are just victims themselves of bad management. They might be at the top and we are at the bottom, but the system itself is more to blame than the person. And so if we want to see reform, if we want to see adjustment in a meaningful way, we have to start connecting mismanagement and misbehavior to bad systems and principles, much more so than quote unquote bad people. So what does the Bhakta's Bill of Rights provide us? Potentially a common understanding of community privilege and duty, to discuss problems with systems before people, as I was mentioning, and to keep the way forward clear and accountable for all. It's not a people problem, it's a systems problem. And if you can hold that narrative, then you avoid the specter of Vaishnava prad, You help to educate people about their actual personal needs rather than anchoring things to charisma and personality, which is a danger in our Vaishnava Sangha in general. And you provide a clear way forward, not only for the present community, how do we fix the present dysfunction? It's not by installing a new charismatic leader who's charismatic in a better way than the last guy was. It's by establishing systems, protocols, principles by which the next generation can pick them up and carry them forward and live into them, not requiring themselves the same kind of charisma as the previous generation, but being able to live out in their own way and express in their own way the principles that all good society is centered around. So our Bhakti's Bill of Rights is of 5. And it's always an aspiration. So the first part of the document mentions this, that this is not a promise of any particular behavior, rather it is a commitment of intention and is invited to be used to frame dialogue about our yatra's development. Functionally, my hope for the Bhakti's Bill of Rights is that individual temple leaders and managers, as well as congregants, will sign it as an aspiration of intention. It's not ratifying into law, because we have many laws ratified and we see what good they've done us. It is not ratifying into law. It is inculcating into the heart and psyche of the community what are the ethics and principles of responsible, respectful behavior socially together, which support the potential of faith in spirit. First, I need trust in action. Before I can have faith in this ethereal experience of spirit, I need trust in the day-to-day, face-to-face interactions I have with those who are claiming to be connected to spirit. And so the aspiration, even the ideal of that on-the-ground culture, we should never even think that it's a law that's been ratified and now we're doing it because we all said we have. It's always something to carry on our head. It's always something to aspire for, to move towards. But as soon as we think, yes, I'm doing it, that's the first sign that we aren't, and that we're soon to start taking advantage of those same principles and weaponizing them rather than using them as ways to empower our sense of responsible behavior. So the document begins with this statement that we're not ratifying this into law, rather we are signing this as a demonstration of intention. We hope within our yatra here in Michigan, California, London, Australia, India, we hope to create this kind of atmosphere, and we offer these precepts as a way to frame the dialogue. If you have a problem with us or the way things are going, the way things are done, speak to us using this language, and we will recognize that as a valid concern and be able to dialogue with you in a healthy way about it. And so then in that way, this Bhakti's Bill of Rights is not just protection for citizens on the ground, but it's also very helpful for healthy leaders. Healthy leaders know that it's important to receive feedback from citizens, but it's also very difficult when every citizen thinks they can just bring to you every little old complaint. But when your citizens are cultured about what's actually a real complaint, what's a legitimate concern, and what's the respectful way to bring it to my leader who has so much on their plate and is trying against all odds to keep the balls in the air despite lots of energy trying to knock them off, what's the empathic, considerate way to respect my leader by bringing them this legitimate concern? This Bhakti's Bill of Rights is as much about that as it is about citizens' rights and need for respect. So our first precept, all beings are part and parcel of Sri Krishna. Again, seems obvious, but it's worth stating. Every being has the right to pursue their journey towards their lordships, free of exploitation, manipulation, or coercion from anyone. It's arguable whether it was ever okay for somebody to get someone else to do something in our Krishna consciousness movement just because they were the temple president or the GBC. But these days, it's definitely, not only is it not okay, but it just won't work. You're not going to attract a thoughtful thinking person from the modern world. Forget, there's no more Western world and Eastern world and Indian world. It's all the modern world. And no thoughtful person is going to submit themselves to arbitrary authority for authority's sake. If people don't feel respected, don't feel recognized and heard, they're going to throw you out. And so many people already have thrown out the institution of the Krishna consciousness movement to the detriment of themselves and to the institution, to the movement. So to deeply understand that when we are dealing with people, especially devotees, these are parts and parcel of Krishna. The devotees have Radhika in their heart also. What to speak of having Krishna? They have Bhakti Devi in their heart. And to offer them due respect and deference in those exchanges, whether we are leaders or we are citizens and we're angry at our leaders and we're disappointed in them and we feel betrayed by them, still that sense that they are part and parcel of Krishna, and respect is the first thing they deserve from me before I carry forward the secondary considerations of the exchange. Number two, bhakti is for everyone. We commit to providing, and this are just excerpts of each point has about 3 sentences or so of elaboration within the Bhakti's Bill of Rights. So these are just excerpted sentences. We commit to providing education in the principles of bhakti to anyone who acts in good faith to receive them. We also recognize the qualification of someone to share the principles of bhakti is based on the quality of their own faith, not the body they were born in, not how much money they make or don't make, not whose disciple they are or aren't, but the quality of their faith, as judged by the Sangha, not judged by some bureaucratic body miles and miles and continents away, but the Sangha locally, who understands better the faith and pulse of the community than the community itself. What is good for us, what is not good for us. It has been my experience, there are some people I've ISKCON affiliated who travel every year, and I pray they never think to come to my temple, because I will have to tell them, no, you're not allowed here. I don't care if you're ISKCON, I don't care if you're Srila Prabhupada's disciple, I don't care how long you've been around, you're not welcome here. But devotees younger and less established from other sanghas, I happily invite year after year and multiple times a year, because they nourish the faith and trust of my devotees within my community, those who are ultimately under my care. Those people come and they give them a sense of the opportunity of chanting Hare Krishna with none of the baggage. That's what I want, and I'm aware of the need for in my Sangha. And as a local leader, I have the responsibility to curate that and not to accept from a bureaucratic entity far, far away some kind of arbitrary, ultimately, idea of who is good and bad. So bhakti is for everyone, and we recognize that in our local Sangha. Our decisions about who is involved responsibly and who's engaged are based around their faith and not their political affiliation, their situation, their basic situation within the material energy. Number 3, leadership is accountable to its constituents. We have a transparent and reasonable process for establishing the leadership and governance of our community and the resources it stewards. Basic understanding of this is that if you don't know how to establish or remove your local leadership, you don't really have a community yet. You have like benevolent oligarchy at best. They might be good leaders, but they're not established. The community is not relating to them in a way that's going to be carried forward. It will end with their charisma, and probably in the meantime, it will end with somebody else sneaking in because of the gaps created by the lack of natural accountability. So at our own community, 3 years ago, when I began this conversation of the need for us to have a local constitution and the need for us to have a cabinet and a council and these different political structures, people got worried that I was trying to quit. And they're like, hey, wait, you just started this thing like 6 years ago. You can't just like dip out now. So depending on your Sangha, it may feel a little awkward to try to establish these things formally where you're at right now. And I can appreciate that. But the principle is important. And to be careful and aware that soon, if not now, it will be important to set up a clear way how those who are in charge are established as in charge, what their responsibilities are when they are in charge, and how it will be that the next person is able to become in charge. Peaceful transfer of power, which is a big discussion in America right now because our dear Shri Donald Trump was not happy about the last election he lost. And so he was trying every which way to make a not peaceful transfer of power, deny the transfer of power that happened. And that has created so much mistrust and pessimism in the American society, so much wasted energy of the citizens. Instead of trying to improve their lives, actually, they're just glued to CNN or Fox News, whichever the case, and listening to prattle about stuff that doesn't matter because of this inability to transfer power peacefully amongst leadership. So our leaders, it is one of your responsibilities to make it clear how to get rid of you, either in a healthy, happy way, sailing off into the sunset successfully, or when you mess up, as you may, your citizens have to be able to call you out on it. And again, if you set up a healthy, happy way to do it, it will involve the least damage to your own reputation and pride. If they have to do it in some political way, in a backroom political way, then it's going to be that much more frustrating and embarrassing for yourself as a leader. But if it's just procedural, if it's just business, then it stings a little less, it hurts a little less. And that ability to do so is essential for a congregation. It's essential for a community to be able to hold their leadership accountable, as Prabhupada pointed to in his direction of management. Clear communication is a right. Our constituents have the right to express their thoughts and concerns within our community, provided they do so in a way consistent with universal values of civility, respect, and our locally established guidelines. Ishtagostis, community information sessions when a new project is coming up. Just as a city council here in the West, anytime some big project is happening in the city, some new apartment building is going up, okay, we have the city council sit in front of and have an open house for all citizens to come and make their comments. This is good, this is bad, I'm concerned about this, I'm concerned about that. And sometimes it's the case that the citizens' concerns alert the government and, oh yeah, this is like not good. And we thought it would be good, but it's not good. Thank you, citizens, for letting us know. And as is often the case, it's understood the project goes forward. And of course, there's some cost, but the benefits outweigh the cost, and we're going to carry it onward. And then the citizens are peaceful because, okay, they heard us at least. And sometimes they also listen to our concerns and acknowledge them and adjust accordingly. So we can trust that reciprocation back and forth. Again, when you create atmospheres where communication can happen, then the communication that comes doesn't always have to be so vitriolic and accusatory, as many ISKCON leaders are familiar with and feel attacked by so often. Every time they get an email, every time somebody comes up to them at a meeting that isn't planned, it's always this kind of impromptu attack, it feels as though. But consider that that's because you haven't established healthy ways of communicating with yourself in the beginning. And if you provided those channels, then the responsible, respectful people, the ones you actually should want to hear the opinion of, they'll take advantage of those channels. They'll learn to use them. They'll engage with them in a way that's healthy for your whole community. And finally, discipline is done in the light. So communication is a right, and discipline should be done in the light, in the public. We have clear mechanisms of due process also codified in a constitution-like document. These ensure disciplinary actions which need to be taken towards someone within our leadership or the general congregation are carried out with appropriate levels of transparency and in good faith towards all parties involved. Sadly, I'm certain that we all know of a good devotee who is doing good service in a temple for days, weeks, months, or years, and then suddenly they don't have that service anymore, and they're not welcome to offer it, and there's no explanation as to why. There's no discussion of how they might be restored in that service in the future. The service is just gone. And maybe some generic discussion of something having been done wrong is given to them, but nothing meaningful, nothing close to due process. What is due process? When an accusation is made against someone, it triggers this whole sequence of events within the context of the law to set up an understanding of figuring out, was something actually done wrong, what was done wrong, and then what should be done about what has been done wrong. And all of those things within the frame of a healthy political sphere are done objectively. Doesn't matter that you're so-and-so's disciple, that you donated this much and you've been around for this long. If you've done something wrong, that has to be dealt with in the appropriate way, in a clear and objective way. Otherwise, it causes others to lose trust and faith in the Sangha, to lose trust and faith in the community. The most precious thing, the thing Sri Ram let his wife go to Valmiki's ashram for, the rumors of a Shudra. Sri Ram was ready to remove the physical presence of Sita from his whole life. That kind of trust that Sri Ram was protecting, that is what is lost when we don't have a due process in our local communities for everything from small infractions and mistakes to huge discussions and decisions over finances and child abuse, etc. And so in the language of the Bhakti's Bill of Rights, we do mention appropriate transparency, that appropriate levels of transparency, some things for the victim's sake especially, should not be done with everybody's full awareness. At the same time, there does have to be a process of documenting things in such a way that if and when somebody's service is checked or punishment is levied, if an appeal needs to be made by that person because things were not actually done on the up and up and it was a political hit and not an appropriate punishment, that can be brought out, that can be demonstrated, that can be shown with the help of the rest of the citizens who are aware and healthy within this ecosystem of a positive political framework for our Gaudiya Vaishnavism. So that's our 5 tenets of the Bhakti's Bill of Rights. And if we can learn to contextualize all of the different grievances that we have within the context of these 5 tenets, whether it be financial transparency or mission and vision of the yatra, or dealing with the abuses of the past or the abuses of present, if we can learn to stop anchoring it to specific personalities and people, and instead start calling to these principles, we lack due process, and that's the issue. We lack a clear understanding of how to remove this dysfunctional management structure, these dysfunctional managers. And that's why all of this dysfunction continues, because nobody knows how to get rid of these guys. When you start being able to point to those things, the power in that pointing is much more effectual than when you're pointing a finger at a person. Because again, when that happens, we're on some subtle level implicating ourselves as perpetrators of violence also, not recognizing that individual's own suffering, that own individual's victimhood within the circumstance. We're not trying to improve the atmosphere, and therefore we're not really helping the situation. If we can learn that simplicity is Vaishnavism and so is good governance, to be able to point to these principles, we will actually feel the upliftment of the devotional society that was intended by Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur and Bhaktisiddhanta and Bhaktivedanta Swami and all the sincere devotees over the decades and soon to be centuries who have given their lifeblood to see this movement move in modernity. These simple principles will ensure that the toxicities that we've seen bubble up over the last few decades will have a much harder time taking hold if each individual in a community who's mature is able to clearly call these things out when they're not attended to. So that is our discussion for the day, devotees, from my side. Now I'm hoping to hear some reflections, comments from your side. I see we have a few things in the chat. Balaram is saying, boom shakalaka. Translation, mind blown, boom shakalaka. Okay, very good. What are your citizens removing you from in this scenario? We're referencing citizens removing, devotees removing, say, a temple president from a congregation where they've been entrenched for a very long time. This happened in New York a few years ago. I shouldn't even say the state, but anyway, we'll leave it at that. This happened at a place in America a few years ago. Like, how to get rid of this devotee who's a good devotee and also wreaking havoc and potentially compromising the whole yatra and decades of effort. Like, how to remove them? No one knows, and no one can catalyze that process in a responsible way without implicating themselves in this very nasty political environment where you're going to get called out for a prod and overstepping boundaries and offending senior devotees, blah, 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 blah. So who wants to get in that? Who wants to risk their spiritual life for some political action? And so this vagary that goes on within the social political structure of our communities discourages responsible behavior. So in this case, if there's a clear procedure, this is how we go about addressing a temple president that's failing us, for instance, or this is how we go about helping a good temple president transition and establishing a new one. It lets everybody on the ground have healthier interactions with each other and have a deeper sense of investment in the Sangha, because it's not that I'm going to be subjected to someone's charisma and personal ambition. This is a common, this is a decision we've come to as a community, a leader we've all agreed to on some level, and we're going to abide by their direction. And if we don't agree, then there's processes for having them taken away. It's a big discussion, and I wouldn't advocate direct democracy in all yatras or even most yatras. You have a place of 8,000 devotees that's been around for 40, 50 years. Don't just put out ballot boxes to get your temple president set up. It takes more nuance than that. But the principle of congregational accountability, that is essential everywhere you go. There has to be some consideration of the voice of the congregation. Lokabandhuji.
All right, well, I'm always excited to be in this presentation of yours. I've been in this for a few more than once. It's like a cosmos full of stars. The examples you bring out of these kings. I was excited to see the entire presentation, which of course we didn't have the time for today, but just a few examples is amazing. I was thinking about the point, in Gaudiya community or any religious community or take it any social community, leader is a strong word. It starts off with the red flag. Hey, hold on. You're supposed to be the servant, which is quite right. That's what the leader is supposed to be doing, is serving, bringing the community together in the social order, in the sense of hierarchy, in the sense of the ontological position of who's supposed to be where and doing what. And in many cases, if this role, so to speak, is taken in a negative sense, or in a sense of abuse, the person itself wants to, take advantage of his role, then it can be abused, or the people under uses this person as a bait to do all of the mischief and blame it. He's accountable for it. He's the one who should take responsibility. That kind of attitude. I've been listening to this beautiful podcast, Living Prayer, between Padmanabh Maharaj and Samal Prabhu. Eye-opening for me, and some points that I can relate from. It's a wonderful podcast if someone wants to really understand what prayer is. Amazing podcast to look into. One thing that I was trying to relate is that prayer is not a solo path. It's not a one direction. It's not that you do alone. It is something that you do together. It's a communion. It's a shift from seeking help to profound availability of the leader and availability of the person, the community. And trust becomes the foundation. That's the canvas where you can paint everything else, problems or workshops, disgust, frustration, and resentment, all of that. Trust becomes that. When you allow for that dynamic, then naturally you can reveal your heart. And Arjuna and Ram, such amazing examples. They didn't even get into the depth of scrutinizing, are you saying the right thing? Arjuna didn't go to the Brahmana. Hold on, I have to go back and ask people.
Is it true or not?
Is it true or not? It's immediate accountability. Yeah, let's do this. I'm going to act on this. It's that presence, allowing to flow. And one example that came up in the podcast is about a person rowing the boat. It's the person who is doing the job, and the river is also flowing. It's both ways. The energy is flowing both ways. Yeah. So that was one thing that came up. Don't want to take up a lot of time, but another thing about the system itself that you were speaking about, I was thinking that as sadhana, sadhana is like a container. The system is like a container. It's something that you can structure, not necessarily a principle which is always supposed to be this way. It can be flexible. It can be changed depending on the the position and the status of an individual. And what happens within that is the communion. That's the prayer. That's and in a lot of cases that becomes the data people pointing, you're the problem. But let's first scrutinize the container, the system, and
That's right.
if that can be adjusted, then that's probably the root cause for a lot of problems. So
That's right. Thank you for highlighting that. And in the presentation, we frame that as upgrading the dialogue from personal grievance to principled concern. Start being able to address the system, the container, rather than the person holding it. Oh, it's leaking out. It's your fault. It's spilling. It's the container that's the issue. And then it depersonalizes it in a healthy way that allows us to have the conversation without triggering people to become defensive and dismissive of people's legitimate concerns. What you brought out also reminds me of the importance of leaders bracing themselves. And thank you, Ma. I see Sveitadweep, you have your hand up, so we'll come in a moment. But the leaders need to brace yourselves for the backlog of resentment, frustration, etc., that has built up in our communities that has nothing to do with you. I just started my gig a few years ago, and I've made some mistakes, but I didn't make the mistakes decades ago. But I'm the representative of those now. I take the blame for those now. I have to bear the frustration of those people who haven't processed that yet. And I have the opportunity to break that cycle of trauma for them. If I can stand in front of it in a noble way, I actually have the opportunity to be a real part of a solution. But it comes first with me understanding I'm going to have to bear the brunt of things that maybe don't entirely involve me, and to accept that's the need of the hour within our devotee communities. If we think about the larger development of the movement, and Padmanabh Maharaj speaks about this often, it's a time of grieving. And grief comes with anger and resentment and lots of other ugly, difficult emotions that don't hearken to the sunshine and rainbows of the Harinam Sankirtan party that we thought we were joining. But if we don't make a space for those toxic emotions to be received and purged, then we won't ever get back to the sunshine and rainbows experience. It will continue to ever increasingly just be this religious narrative that we have to scream louder and louder and louder to drown out the cries of the people who are in agony because they're not having a felt experience of spirituality provided by the safe container that leadership is supporting them with. So Sveitadweep, please, and then Bhakti Rasa.
Hare Krishna, thank you so much for the really wonderful presentation. I was thinking that, most of us here are probably like already inspired by Harmony Collective and could agree like completely 100% with all the points you were sharing.
Jai.
No, so I was thinking like, what if you're looking at a community or leadership where all of this is missing to almost like 100%.
Right, the other end of the spectrum kind of thing.
Yes, and you see like there's quite a considerable amount of devotees who are supportive of that leadership. And some have distance, like how you were saying, some only go for like celebrations or some not at all. And
so what to do in that situation? You're kind of
like when the leadership is not even ready to accept any feedback, because we've seen like when the feedback was given in one form or the other, I wouldn't say the feedback was given like appropriately, like how you were saying.
Yes.
But we have seen some of the feedbacks given but completely ignored, or even like called mischief, like causing mischief and things like that.
Right.
So yeah, like what to do in a situation like that.
Haribol. This is the question of the hour, of course. And the first thing I would say is exactly what we're doing right now. There needs to be a churning. There has to be kata, faith amongst those who have conviction in this truth. We have to help each other deeply feel it and experience it, and remind each other that that is the way. Think about the birth of our Sankirtan movement in Navadvip. We're going to be celebrating the appearance of Sri Chaitanya in less than a month now. And he was born into this atmosphere of confusion and privilege and abuse of religious and political systems. And just a small contingent, Advaitacharya and Haridas and Srivas, just like a dozen folks were like, God, this is terrible. This is not how it's supposed to be. This is not working. How do we fix it? We have no idea. But anyway, we got to keep together so that we don't get drawn into or tempted by that other, in some ways more convenient, easier idea of how things should be going. And so there, in my experience, frankly, I call it the Underground Railroad. In the US during slavery times, there was this network of people who were providing safe passages for slaves from the southern states where slavery was legal to the northern states where slavery was illegal. And there's this underground network of devotees. If you have individual conversations with nearly any devotee, I don't know a single devotee that I'm close to now who will tell me that the 5 things that we talked about on the Bhakta's Bill of Rights are not the God's honest truth. But if you get them into a public environment, they have a harder time standing and agreeing. And so that is what I'm hoping to be the potential and the potency of these 5 sutras, these 5 simple anchors, is that now it's right there in front of everybody in a clear way. Speak to this, point to this. We don't have to talk about this one and that one, the details of the dirty laundry of your yatra over the decades. We don't have to go there anymore. We just have to ask the present temple president, why don't you let us have an Ishtagosti? Why don't you establish a way for people to levy complaints and concerns to you? Why don't you have a way for yourself to leave the service and to have somebody else established in it? That's only responsible. And if you're unwilling to do that, make them say it out loud. Don't let them engage on the conversation on the level of popularity and backroom politics. Make them say to everyone's face, no, to these 5 unassailable points of social structure for social structure for spiritual growth. Make them say it out loud and then point to everyone. That's all you've got. They've now said the best thing possible. The most powerful point anyone could make in the discussion is that they are literally unwilling to establish this healthy dynamic. So now it's incumbent upon the rest of us to rally together and figure out some way to create a healthy dynamic, because they've literally told us they're unwilling to give it to us. So it takes bravery, it takes consensus, it takes cohesion, but with the that's what we're hoping for the clarity with these 5 precepts, just like in America and in the West in general now, but America, every citizen on every street corner knows I have the right to free speech and freedom of religion. I have the right to a fair trial if I get arrested. And so if I get arrested, like, you have to treat me a certain way. I might be standing over somebody with a gun in my hand and the person in front of me is dead. Like, I'm obviously guilty, police person, but you still have to read me my rights. You still have to give me a call with a lawyer. You still have to give me a trial, because those are the bare minimum of assurances to know with confidence that integrity and the truth has a place in our society. Same thing for our devotee society. We can't, this naivety that, oh, we're Hare Krishnas and Tulsi's around our necks, so it's all okay. That those days, if there ever was a time for them, they have long passed. How does that feel, Swetadweep? Your question's an important one. I hope there's even 1 or 2 people that listen to this that feel themselves in that situation. So how would you say to your own question?
Thank you. I mean, it is encouraging. There's like few other bits to it. I'm thinking, like, what if it is a scenario like, we feel like a complete leadership has to be changed even, because in the first place, it is self-appointed and not appointed by congregation.
Yeah. Right.
So it seems like a much bigger problem. And but what you're saying is really encouraging, like we need to start somewhere. And this really, like, being part of this meeting, like presentation, is a big step, it seems.
And I make myself available for anybody that would like encouragement and want to churn it with somebody. Send me an email, send me a Facebook message, WhatsApp, etc. I'm here for this. I'm passionate about this. And my 10 years of mistakes and also some triumphs, I want to save people time and energy. I want devotees to get back to being devotees and to stop being harassed by their social environment in unnecessary ways. So this, it's a weapon. It's meant to be something that is unavoidable. Point to this, make them talk about this, make them say no to that, not no to you, not no to your seniority or your lack of spiritual adhikar, or you initiated by whoever, whenever, however. Make them say no to this, and just make them do it enough times that everybody else recognizes this is not okay.
Yeah.
Bhakti Rasa, you have your hand for a long time.
Thank you
Oh,
so
sorry,
much.
sweet. Yeah, thank you. Wonderful to have you.
Okay, thank you for that wonderful, all your perspective and points that you make. I was thinking that one thing that kind of vetoes the whole thing that you're proposing is if we don't have ourselves a separation of church and state. If we don't separate the acharya, the guru, from this type of political, representation, because at any point he can just veto the whole thing.
It's true. And another tenet of Srila Prabhupada's intended structure was that sannyasis, what to speak of gurus, sannyasis are not on the GBC. As an example, Prabhupada had that tenet in the early days, and of course that didn't hold. Again, Prabhupada was in some ways his own worst enemy. His charisma and purity and such undermined his own vision for healthy political structure while he was present. But present now and going forward, having learned the lesson so clearly, it's essential that there be a separation between the spiritual and the socio-political. And at least my own spiritual master, I know and have been a part of managerial environments with him, and he tells disciples that it's your responsibility to speak against me if you disagree with something I'm saying regarding the managerial service. He himself at least is clear about that, although it doesn't mean that the rest of the atmosphere is healthy and conducive for it. There is some awareness of that. I'm using that as an example to point that there's some awareness of that even amongst those that are holding those dual roles. And the solution is right there in our Bhagavad Gita and the Mahabharata in general. Grandfather Bhishma is having Krishna by his side at the end of his days, indicating his spiritual stature as a pure devotee, worthy of all admiration and respect. And for his political choices, he's also worthy of Arjuna's arrows. And to have that awareness, to have that discernment about the need of the hour, for the sake of the spiritual society, what we may have to, how we may have to address even our highest spiritual preceptors, we just have to get on with it and accept it. The longer we wait, the longer we like tread water, the more loss of trust and faith and momentum happens in the movement. So it's somebody brought this to me a few days ago, and they're an in-between devotee, in between the generations, very few, rare. But there's the Prabhupada era, 80 and before, and then there's like 2000 and onward, and then there's this weird group of folks in the middle. There's very few of them left because there was a holocaust of faith and all the fallout of all the misbehavior and mistakes. And so it's very weird, that generation, very rare and precious souls. And one of them was trying to get me to not do this kind of stuff, not talk about these things and in public ways. And if you have a problem, say it to the devotee personally, that kind of thing. And I said, Prabhu, the reason I have to be so forceful and arrogant and, uppity, fine, I might be also just by nature those things. But the reason that we have to be so vociferous today is because your generation didn't do it 20, 30, 40 years ago. And so it's just building up and building up and building up. And it's becoming more and more and more difficult to address. And so in order to address it, you have to be stark and point arrows now. Instead of handshakes and sitting down at tables, now we're having to point arrows. And whose fault is it? Is it really my fault and the others who are taking on the mantle of this kind of essential principled adjustment? Or is it those who didn't address it in a more reasonable, manageable way 10, 20, 30, 40 years ago? So yes, it's hard. Yes, it's difficult. And thankfully, we have precedent and permission in the Shastra. I wrote a letter to our GBC some months ago, asking them all to resign and explaining why that would be the healthiest thing for the community. And not that they all have to leave the service, but to be then reinstated. And so some could just bow out. And this resignation is an opportunity to leave without ignominy. And those who want to be reinstated, you have to go through a vetting process. And along with that reinstatement of the GBC, establish a culture for how to establish GBC that's more in line with Prabhupada's direction of management. This was the indication. Very reasonable, very deferential, actually. But of course, it was taken in this very how dare you kind of way. What a ridiculous and absurd and, haughty suggestion. But the person who I was by the side of through that whole endeavor was the person who wrote for our community, for all intents and purposes. He wrote the Mahabharata. I'll use his name because he's out there enough anyway, Krishna Dharma Prabhu. And so I felt very reassured, here's the guy who gave us the book on how to go at your elders. And he's by my side while I'm trying to do that in the healthiest, most faithful way. And no thunderbolts have come out of the air, and I can still hold my japa and feel affection in my heart. So I encourage devotees. It's not as dangerous as it seems if you're doing it for real authentic reasons, for the right purpose. Not only is it not dangerous, it's rewarding in some, internal sense. Not that I want the dysfunction to continue so I can continue to get to have fun presentations about how to, fix it. But there's a reward for being brave in bhakti. And this is a serious frontier of change that needs to be addressed by anybody who's ready to answer the call. And so here we are trying to create the language and conversation about how to go about that.
And I think how you're doing it, Prabhu, is very effective to train the devotees on the ground. That to this Bill of Rights, quite honestly, we don't even know that we have rights that there can be a bill of.
Exactly.
So this is
exactly.
Unfortunately, and embarrassing as it is, this is groundbreaking work. And I think focusing on training and retraining and reconceptualizing things for the devotees is where the power really is. More so
Amen.
Trying to get the higher ups to change who and what they do. They're too invested, they can't. But yeah,
it's so true. And that again, a friend, more of a peer the other day was that, why are you doing all this? They're never going to listen to you. And I said exactly that, Ma. I said, I don't want them to listen to me. I want you to listen to me. I want my peers and my fellow citizens to listen, because if this awareness comes into our hearts, our children will never be treated that way again. Our women will never be treated that way again. Our ashramites will never be treated that way again. And people will be attracted again in meaningful ways, not just trickling in spite of the movement, 1 or 2 a year, somehow sticking around, but meaningful droves of thoughtful local people again coming to our temples and seeing something that inspires them. That can never happen before these atmospheres of basic trust and respect and responsibility are established for the devotees that already exist. why do people not want to preach and vigorously share about Krishna consciousness anymore? It's not because Krishna is not wonderful and that they don't believe in the acharyas and the power of the holy name. They don't want to invite other people into a toxic environment and feel responsible for the trauma that person's going to go through in that toxic environment. You want to see a burgeoning again of the missionary spirit, make a place where people know others will be safe to come. We don't have that right now. So it's, to your point, Ma, it's for us, it's for me, it's for you. We're churning that conversation. We're convincing each other. We're helping the details be clear so that in our individual yatras, in our individual dealings, we can recognize how essential these principles are to apply, and that will have its effect. That will ripple out over however, I'm here for it. This is my next 40 years. I want to sit down in Braj one day with a clear conscience that I tried. And so the next 30, 40 years, here we are, touting this simple but hopefully effective set of principles.
Thank you.
Yes, Mother Karuneshwari. Excuse me.
Very well. Actually, wasn't sure if I'd raise my hand there, but anyway, I'll take it as Krishna's arrangement. I just really wanted to. I just really wanted to thank you for this presentation. It's just a reflection, really, of some of your points that I really liked. I really love this emphasis on due process, and I was thinking one thing that our Swami Padmanabha often says is uncommon common sense. So when you hear common sense, when you hear common sense, you just know it. And when you hear the truth, you just know it. And I feel like so many of the points you made there, they're just the truth, and they're undeniable. And I think it's a very compassionate approach when you start using due process instead of looking at individuals. And it helps us to become more soft-hearted, because it's such a great point, this point that the accuser can become the abuser. And we can get all sort of caught up in our feelings of righteousness and self-righteousness. And it deflates that whole improper motivation that we kind of know on a deep level isn't right, but sometimes we don't spot it. And
or it's convenient to live from.
Yeah, and it can be a kind of escapism from, looking at our own stuff. I just wanted to say as well that I think I love the points that have come up in the questions. But I think this point that even if this is just the first example of this in your community, even if that seems like a very small step forward when we see so much that needs addressed all over the world, it has to start somewhere. So one living example of it working can have such a knock-on effect in time. And I'm just really grateful that there is an example of this happening somewhere. So that's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you. That feels like a sweet place to close. And thank you for bringing in some of the points that struck you as most essential. And I'll say for myself that as I mentioned at the beginning of the Bill of Rights, it's an aspiration. And I'm the first to know the different ways that we're not consistent with these things in our own community. We had our council and cabinet meeting last night, and we were reinvigorating those after like a year and a half of just not doing it because people are lazy about it, and I don't emphasize it enough, and it doesn't feel quite necessary yet because we're still small and spontaneous of sorts, but it is so essential, and especially for the future of things to grow. And it's an aspiration for us, and I'm happy to invite people to come and see us as an example, but also to help us understand how we can be doing it better, because it's our ideal to serve also. It's not something that we're the representatives of as much as just people who are like signing on and saying, yes, hold us accountable to this, ask us to do this, because this is what we want to do also. And not that we are, but we're hoping to, and please help us. So with that, I'll also thank the Tadatmya platform and Maharaj and Bhakti Rasa and all the devotees who are within that Sangha. I like to think myself a part of it, creating these conversations. It is far beyond myself and I might be one of the few formal institutions that are signing on to these things, but the the silent majority of devotees all over the world who just need this stuff and are desperate for it and are soaking it up from every direction that it's coming. The more directions we give them, the more they're excited and feeling renewed in their spiritual life. It's so much the need of the hour. And so this Bhakta's Bill of Rights, I hope, is just providing a little more context for that conversation, for that sense of community and Tadatmya, shared experience, shared sense of purpose, that we may be far away and in different places doing different things, but actually there's much that we share in common and much that we have to contribute to together.
On that note, I want to let everybody know that this is going to be expanded into a month-long seminar, also 4 parts, so that we can delve deeper into the different topics and how to actually flesh out the concepts that Deva Madhava is presenting to us. And
Again, I appreciate that invitation, and I look forward to delving in a little bit more to the practicals of each of these and how to bring them out within community.
yeah, it's beautiful. Thank you. And also to let people know that in 2 weeks, another Brenda Sundari will be presenting, like Deva Madhava is, and her topic will be on the wholesome self, how to integrate different aspects of our life and make our practice more authentic, how to become more authentic humans in bhakti.
Looking forward to that. Brenda's one of my heroes. She's another official person doing lots of unofficial good work.
March 20th will be Brenda Sundari's.
Right.
Thank you again, Deva Madhava. Awesome work.
Thank you, dear devotees. My pranams to everyone and everyone who watched. Jai Sachinandana.